I will come to you in the silence. I will lift you from all your fear. You will hear my voice. I claim you as my choice. Be still and know I am here.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you again, even though, as we know, I'm not seeing you right now. But it was good to see you on two Zoom conversations that we've had that I think were very well responded to, and I think people have enjoyed them. Please join us next time, because you don't have to have been on the other two to get up to speed. So it's very, very good group, very vocal group. And so we're happy to have you. We'd be happy to have you. This week, this is the third week out of 4. This week, our topic is coping with loneliness, isolation, and fear of failure. And then next week, the last week, we'll be talking about facing change, such as aging, illness, and the fear of missing out. I wanted to start with this prayer. Lord, help me to be grateful for what I have, to remember that I don't need most of what I want, and that joy is found in simplicity and generosity. The scriptural reference for this week is Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have in mind for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for peace, not disaster, and to give you a future filled with hope. When you call me and come and pray to me, I will listen to you. When you search for me with all your heart, you will find me. In providing hope in the future of the Jewish people who were prisoners in Babylon. So that's what was going on in Jeremiah's time, but this, to me, is very appropriate for what we're dealing with now. In an article by a woman named Sandra Lamott for CNN, talks about signs that your coronavirus anxiety is turning very serious, and that we need to deal with anxiety through action. We're all facing isolation, lockdowns, loss of jobs, income, loss of retirement, loss of economic stability. And speaking of stability, the wild swings in the stock market, for example, could give you a whiplash. In the last 2 months, they've been based on fear and misinformation. Yesterday, Monday, today's Wednesday, but Monday, the stock market surged nearly 900 points in one day. And 2 months ago, it had fallen over several day period, 8,000 points, wiping out all the gains from the year of 2019. Daily changes of hundreds of points either direction, as I said, could give you a whiplash. But last week, the stock market fell 500 points because the chairman of the Federal Reserve said that recovery would be slow and maybe take several years. And part of the surge on Monday was that this same man, the Federal Reserve Chairman, had given an interview on 60 Minutes that said that he thought that the economy would come back and it was very strong, never bet against the American people. It was a very optimistic statement. And it actually, he learned, if he didn't know it before, that his one person's comments could increase or decrease the value of investments by 1,000 points either way. So also there was a surge on Monday because of a potential vaccine for a virus that's in plan of the stage 1 study, where 8 people out of 42 tested actually had a positive result, which was very good and has real implications for the future. But those kinds of things can cause these dramatic increases or decreases in the stock market, and people who have investments in the stock market, mostly in retirement, they can their anxiety level can really shift from day to day. So, and we're also at this time experiencing grief and loss. Well, grief, obviously, I mean, there are almost 100,000 people who have died just in the United States. 100,000 people. I mean, that each one of those people, had loved ones and families. Most of them couldn't be with their family. There are all kinds of issues related to that. The people are missing their relationships. We're afraid of an invisible enemy that's in our midst who lives around where we're breathing, and that could cause serious injury to us or to members of our family. We see reality for what it is. There's a worldwide, it's worldwide, and it's crashing in many ways the world economy. So how much emotional resiliency do we have? People are developing, this woman said in her article, almost the trauma like soldiers do, PTSD, that we've been in a war zone. We're living with a chronic threat response. So do you feel sometimes at night when you're trying to sleep, you kind of can hear your heart racing? This causes sleep disturbances, irritability, hair trigger responses, and difficulty making serious decisions. We're insecure about our decisions because we don't know what the future is going to hold here. We don't know when this is going to end, and we don't have a good sense of what's going to happen. And we're now in even a more traumatic time because of the opening of the economy, opening of things around us, and we don't know if they're safe. Some may be safe, some may not be safe, but we don't know. And so we don't know whether to participate. We don't know how to participate. We want it. Everybody wants our economy to get moving. Everybody wants that, but we don't know what that really means. So what can we do? Well, we can not focus on the news so much, not tune in 24/7. I have a couple of friends who send me messages about, look at what's happening right now. Look, see what's on this channel. See what's being said right now. And I thought, I can't do that. I personally can't do that because just the emotional swing of going from one crisis then to a possible recovery to another crisis is a very emotionally tiring for me. So what do we need to look at with each other? That there may be people who seem to be just losing interest because they can't do anything. They feel like they're, as we said last week, part of the problem, not really part of the solution, that they're losing interest and they've stopped reaching out. They've just become their world has gotten smaller and smaller. And we know that our church is attempting to do some things, some very important things and well thought out things, but just almost baby steps to get us dealing with our relationships again. And that's hard to do. This has only been, about 3 months where we've been in this isolation mode, but it's really hard to just start reaching out. Are you going to trust that you can do that safely? And the idea that this affects everyone the same is just not true. This epidemic, like the economy and the world in general, does not treat everybody the same. So in our society, we have some people who are well off, who are comfortable. They're not missing a paycheck. They're not missing money. They're having trauma because of the virus, but they're not really economically suffering from this. We have people who are actually missing meals, who are missing food. I mean, there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference in access to medical care. We have people who can go to any doctor they want to or any specialist they want to. They have plenty of insurance, and we have other people who don't. So this does not affect us each the same. And so if we don't react the same to it, it shouldn't be surprising. But there's also, I think, at some point, a feeling of helplessness. And this isn't just related to the virus, but this is related to many aspects of life. We were learning that there have been a number of articles written about this feeling of isolation in our society, and that the people who seem to be suffering the most are men who are single in their later years, after 60 years old, who live alone, and college students who are away from home for the first time and trying to figure out their own lives' paths. And that these have been there before this virus came. And the effect of the virus, of course, is making people, by necessity, be more isolated. And so we're going to have to deal with that. We realize that, and also talking about inequities, that children who are, it's easy to say that you can learn from home if you have a computer or if you have the internet or Wi-Fi. But there are many, many people in this country who don't have that, don't have access to that, and can't pay for it. It's expensive, and they can't pay for it, or they're kind of challenged on where they're living, so you can install your internet in an apartment that you're going to have to leave, or you might be evicted from soon. So there was a report in the Houston paper too about there thousands of students in the HISD and surrounding districts had not even picked up the packets of information that they need to deal with for the end of school. So there's going to be as time goes on, a significant difference in where our students are, our children are, and how much progress or lack of progress they've made the last 3 months, especially if this continues through the summer and into the fall. We're staying kind of in a fight or flight mode, that we continue to have adrenaline pumping, that we have a fear of the results of things opening, a fear of how long this is going to take, a fear of what is going to happen. So what can we do? We can reach out ourselves and connect, have meetings. We're doing that. We're having meetings. We're having phone calls. Make a list of connections that you want to energize that maybe you've let lapse a little bit. Be careful of social media and dwelling on criticism and negativity. Breathe deeply, and this actually is helpful. Ann Winslow will know about this because she and I talked about this a long time ago, that you breathe through your nose and you breathe in through your nose, breathe out through your mouth, shaped kind of like you're breathing through a straw. And if you'll do this, when you get really anxious about something, it's amazing that this can kind of calm you down. So that's a suggested thing. Another thing that Sherry Brewer mentioned on one of our Zoom calls, which she's already doing, is every day to practice gratitude. Write 2 or 3 things down that you're grateful for. And maybe then write a thank you note to someone, or send a card. My little grandchild, Audrey, was saying to me the other day, after Mother's Day, I was thanking them for Mother's Day cards they had sent. And she said, "Grammy, will you send me a card?" Which I did immediately upon that request. But I thought, you should have sent her cards all along to encourage her, because they're almost 5 years old, so they've been through a lot at that young age. So practice gratitude. Control your thoughts. Whenever you start to think dark thoughts, or you have scary thoughts, then just try to put those things out of your mind. And you can do that with prayer. Just stop, listen, and pray. So don't let those dark thoughts or scary thoughts control how you feel. Make an action plan for what you can do. talk to others about how they're coping and about how they're handling their homeschooling or their elderly parents. A lot of my friends and acquaintances have elderly parents or siblings that they're having to deal with who are going through a more of a crisis than they are. So they're not only dealing with, in my age group, they're dealing with either parents or siblings or children and grandchildren with going through different phases of our crisis here. It would be good to establish a schedule. Don't sleep all day and stay up all night, but establish a schedule, exercise, have study time with other people, meditation, work on projects, develop order in this time of chaos. Limit the time that you listen to the media and laugh. This was also suggested. Watch something funny or read a funny book or talk to a friend. I have several friends who make me laugh because they're very funny people. So to continue those optimistic activities, stay optimistic. Don't let the terrifying things that we have out there become too important. And if you're tired, it seems like that especially can affect you. Remember that God is on the side of his people, and we need to have courage in times of serious stress. Remember what was in the Bible, that it says, a worry cannot add a single hour to your life. So don't worry about things, and especially worry about things that we've talked about before that you can't really do much about, or worry about things that haven't happened, worry about things that might happen. As we know, and there's a lot of help for us to worry about these things through media, because I've noticed in the newspaper that recently there are all these predictions that this is going to be a very bad hurricane season. And the fact that we just had a tropical storm before June 1st is some indicator that that's going to be true. But that's not necessarily correct. And of years that we've had predictions that there would be, X number of named storms, and that either did happen or didn't happen, but the prediction didn't have too much to do with it. But that's another thing for us to worry about. Worry about flooding. Now we have every right to worry about flooding here, but to worry about things in addition to what we're already worrying about makes it more difficult to stay optimistic. But remember that worry cannot add a single minute to your life. So what have we learned in the past that we can do to control the epidemics? We can do it, and if we don't do it, we're really playing with fire. Remember, we talked about prior epidemics like cholera, where they determined that in the cholera epidemic in the late 1800s, that part of the problem was sanitation, that the streets, the sanitation systems were bad. People were not, they were throwing waste into the streets, and people were being exposed to all kinds of things that way. And so after the cholera epidemic was over, there was a big push, and rightly so, to improve sanitation in cities, and that happened, which really did away with cholera as an epidemic. We talked about other types of epidemics where social distancing was important, where quarantining people who had the disease was essential, and that happened in the polio epidemic, when people who had polio were separated from the rest of society for some period of time to keep sick people away from well people, to instruct people that if they're sick, not to go to work or not to go to church or not to go to school, because this just kept the epidemic going. So we've learned these things, and these are public health truths, and we need to remember them, that in fact probably where we are now in this pandemic is that it's improved because we're practicing these very things that have been true for 200 years practically. So we have to be careful that we don't forget this and just throw caution to the wind and pretend that that somehow these aren't important, because they are. One thing that I want us to talk about when we have our Zoom conversation is kind of this analysis. So think about this situation, other situations in your life. Is God aware of our situation? We'll talk about that. Does God care about where we are and what's going on? Can God help us? And then will He help us? And how will He help us? So we're going to talk about a couple of different scenarios when we have our discussion and discuss those questions, because, what role, if any, is God playing in this pandemic? And what does God want us to do in our response to it? But also, going back briefly about the loneliness epidemic. There was a loneliness epidemic before this virus. How do we fight loneliness and isolation? And why do we call this a loneliness epidemic? Is loneliness more prevalent today than in the past? What social changes have contributed to the increase of loneliness and isolation? In 2019, the New York Post reported that 1 in 4 felt that they had no one to confide in. How can you reach out to family and friends? Have you allowed certain friends to drift away, and would you like to reach out to them or to bring them back into your circle of friends? Should you do that? Do you know of someone who is lonely, or someone who seems isolated from the rest of the community and the people that you know? Is someone in your family gone or estranged? Is the distance so great that you don't see them? Proverbs 27:10 says, "Better is a neighbor nearby than a brother far away." So remember that you're not alone. So find a friend or be a friend. Now, most of the people who've been on these Zoom conversations are really not people who isolate themselves particularly. You're all quite social people. But other people are not that confident or that lucky, really. And so do you have an obligation then, because of your personality and your circle of friends, to reach out to that person that you think might be isolated? And how do we contribute to our spiritual family? How do we as a church welcome people and make them feel part of a congregation when they seem to be isolated? It's going to be interesting because for years we've all kind of conducted ourselves at church the same way. We have the same group of people that we might sit by or that we know and we talk to, but we've all been separated now for a long time, and we haven't been physically to the church building for months. Is that going to change? Are we all going to feel a little isolated, and we're all going to feel like we need to reconnect with each other? So what is our obligation as far as reaching out to others? And they may be more needy of that now than ever before. We need to let down the walls of isolation, and even in the past, ways that we might have reached out, not have reached out to people, that we are going to now. We don't need to be afraid ourselves to be vulnerable or insecure because we might feel rejected. And that's why a lot of people are isolated. They may have tried to interact with people. Maybe they were rejected, or maybe family members rejected them, or a spouse or other relationships rejected them. So after so many rejections, they just kind of quit trying because it was too painful. You need to back away from social media. Again, I'm going to harp on that, because social media is a way to criticize people without taking any responsibility for it. And there's no golden rule there. The golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them treat you. Do you do that with social media? Do other people that you see, their comments on social media, deal with people that way, that they treat other people the way they would want to be treated? Spend time with God. He's in our corner and won't leave us alone. And it's going to be important as church members to take an extra step, I think, to reach out to people who have felt alone, who maybe have had a really hard time with the stresses that we've talked about for several weeks. There's a statement by Dale Carnegie that really is pretty interesting. It says, "Do you know that you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in them than in 2 years of trying to make them interested in you?" I thought that was interesting. Might not be exactly true, but certainly it has a meaning. Henry David Thoreau, who I'll also mention next week, said that I never found a companion that was so companionable than solitude. And I think Thoreau was such a sort of a cranky person that he was allowed all the solitude he wanted. But some people are fine with solitude, with being alone, being within themselves, but that's different from isolation. Solitude is something that you kind of choose. Isolation is not. And when we're depressed and isolated, we need a message of hope. And the place that you can get hope, of course, is from God and from going to Jesus with our problems. How realistic are your fears and your loneliness and your isolation? And what actions do you need to take to address them or to help someone else address theirs? And how can I learn to release these fears to God? And finally, in talking about fear, one of the other fears that we had, not related to the coronavirus, is a fear of failure. Fear of failure will keep us from taking action. We talked earlier about analysis paralysis and how we look at the pros and cons of something so many times that the pros would really never win out and the cons would keep you from taking any action at all. But you need to think about that things are usually not as bad as you fear they are or as difficult. And it may surprise you that how manageable certain decisions are. Successful people are also willing to do things that other people maybe aren't willing to do. So sometimes choosing the road not taken, we all know Robert Frost's great poem, the road not taken may be harder, riskier, and inconvenient, may be, as I said, a risk that you didn't really want to take, but it ended up being the right choice. Are we afraid of criticism? Are we afraid of a stigma if we fail? Or are we afraid of shame? Winston Churchill, you all know about him and you know about his history. He was up and down multiple times in his career. He was a wealthy man, and he was, of course, in the aristocracy in his life. But there were times that he spent years, several decades, kind of in isolation, self-isolation, because he had been in the parliament and he was voted out. He was made fun of. He was jeered and booed sometimes. And then, of course, he became the most gifted orator during the whole Second World War time period and was famous only to be voted out of office shortly after, and then to vote back into office another decade later. Well, he is quoted as saying, "Success consists of going from one failure to another without the loss of enthusiasm." And I thought that was a great Churchill quote. And I thought, he had a lot of confidence in himself, obviously, but he had a lot of negatives along the way. There were several famous athletes who have made the statement that I have missed 100% of the shots that I did not take. Now think about that a second. I missed all the shots I didn't take. And so as far as fear of failure, sometimes the failure could be that I didn't try at all. So we shouldn't be afraid of criticism. Michael Jordan said that he had missed more than 9,000 shots in my career and had lost more than 300 games. Moses, remember, we'll go back to Moses almost every time. Moses said to God, when God sought Moses in the burning bush, he said, God knew this, but he was pointing out, I'm 80 years old. I've been here tending these sheep and tending the crops for my father-in-law for years because I'm actually a wanted criminal in Egypt because of this man that he killed. He said, so you don't want me to go try to help free your people from Egypt and try to get them to the promised land. Don't you want to send somebody else besides me? I'm really not the guy for you. I'm too old. I've got baggage. I'm not very articulate. So I don't want to go see the Pharaoh. I'll probably get in trouble if I go see the Pharaoh. And I'm sure there are many, many people here who are better equipped than I am. I want to talk to you on our next Zoom about other people in the Bible that was showing that God chose the unlikely person. Moses is a great example. There are many more. And so come up with some of these people that you want to mention when we have our discussion. Some examples of choosing the unlikely person for a particular job. Are you afraid of criticism? Can criticism keep you from doing something? You have to have a very tough skin. As I tell my daughter when she gets her feelings hurt about something, I said, you have to develop a hard bark on you instead of skin. You have to have hard bark. And I think about people who have to have hard bark. Because if you're in politics, for example, I don't know how, I don't have that kind of hard bark myself. But being a woman lawyer in the generation that I was coming up in, and Melinda and other lawyers, Sherry, other lawyers that in that particular group, you had to have some hard bark. And so we've developed that. I was thinking about Becky Ames, who, obviously ran afoul of the rules. As it turned out, it was of no moment, but because of the nail salon, Nailgate, I think it's referred to. But think about that, and all the criticism that she received, deserved or undeserved, but criticism, relentless criticism on Facebook, apparently. And I thought, you'd have to have pretty hard bark to just keep going after something like that. Some people would have just kind of gone in their their isolation area and not come out. But apparently she seems to be doing okay. And how far are you willing to go in your own life to please somebody else? What decisions have you made that really were not for your good, but so that you could please somebody else? And why did you want to please somebody else? And this is all part of this idea of the fear of failure. Were you afraid you might, if you didn't appease someone, that you might ruin a relationship? And you might. You can't fight every battle, and I've said many times, being right is not always the best thing to be. You can be right, but uh, you may have to, step on a lot of toes to be right. So maybe it's not always the best thing. Um, but why why have you felt, if you have, the need to appease somebody else or to avoid criticism? And some people, I've heard people say that they would do almost anything not to be in a controversial situation, that they did not want to be criticized. They did not want to sort of take a step out front, so to speak, because they wanted to avoid criticism. Um, and is that important? Is that important for you? Does that make you feel that you've done that because you didn't want to fail? I thought Thomas the other day on our first Zoom was just very appropriate when he said that, of course, what he set out on his own to hang out his own shingle, which was a very courageous thing to do, but he had a lot of angst about it. Of course he did. Anyone would and should, but he did it, and he wasn't so afraid that he would fail, so that it prevented him from doing it. And so he did. He did take a step out there. And in Luke 9:25, you remember this verse. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose himself? And then 24 says, all who want to save their lives will lose them. So this has to do with taking that step, taking that chance, taking that risk that's worth it, one that you've analyzed and you know that risk is important to what I want to do with my life. So you find meaning in your life by serving others and doing what is right. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your being and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And you remember last time we talked a little bit about Lectio Divina and how you would analyze and get into the living word. If you go through this exercise and meditate and pray about you can select any verse you want to, but you can see, what does this mean to me? For example, the one that I just read, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose himself? Okay, so I would ask myself this question, and we're going to talk about this on the Zoom. And I want you to think about, you can select any verse you want to, and think about, one, what does it say? What does it actually say? What is it actually saying? And you can look in a commentary, or you may know, what is it saying to the surrounding? Who is saying it? And what is going on when it's being said? What does it have reference to? And then ask yourself, what does it say to me? Not to just everybody, but what does it say to me specifically? And what do I want to say when I think about this? What do I want to say to God? And what conversation do I want to have with God about this particular verse? And then, what difference does this make to me in what decisions I'm making and what I want to do? One thing last point I'd like to make about where we are in our opening society back up and doing some things and taking some risks. Remember that fear drives certain reactions. Fear can actually make us more cautious, can make us take fewer chances, make us be maybe too cautious. But fear drives those emotions. Anger, which appears to be bubbling up in our society, actually is the opposite. Anger makes people less cautious. It makes them respond sometimes in a reckless way, throw caution to the wind. For example, let's just keep this in mind. This weekend, the beach has been closed for months. The beach was open. So 200 people in Bolivar, our little local beach, 200 people were arrested for numerous things, whether it was alcohol, DUI, public intoxication, drugs, doing whatever. They weren't arrested for not social distancing, but they were not social distancing. They were down at the beach acting like fools. 2 people were shot. And I thought, so this is the way we react when okay, now you can go to the beach. So you go to the beach and almost start a riot. So people, when anger is motivating them and they're frustrated, they react in a more aggressive way. They downplay the risks. And when we're operating under fatigue and stress, then it lowers our perception of risk. So as things open up and we're beginning to try to see if our lives are going to be back to some normal, then we need to think about this, that the fact that we've had these rules in place for a few months was for the public good, not for the government trying to impose on somebody's freedom to act a fool, but it was the public good to try to keep people safe and to reduce a pandemic for which we had no vaccine. And so social distancing and staying out of crowds and staying away from other sick people were really important things to do. We're going to have some good conversations, as you can tell, coming up, and I wanted to there's my closing. I wanted to close with a verse from What a Friend We Have in Jesus. Everybody knows the first verse, of course, but I wanted to talk about the second verse. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear, all because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. So, if you think about it, that we have peace, God promises peace to us, but we forfeit it by some of our own actions or our inactions and our inability to seek God in prayer. And what needless pain we bear, this pain is not necessary. The pain that we can give to God with our concerns and our problems, the pain that we can give to Him if we only will, would be pain that we suffer if we don't do that. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. So I look forward to talking to you on Tuesday, and have a good Memorial Day, and we'll be together then. And if you want to invite somebody to sit in on our conversation, they're most welcome. Thank you, and God bless you, your families, and all of us in this country and the world at large. Thank you.